Ago. I heard somebody say it. Ago. Okay, so for any of you who know Ghanaian culture, when we call people to order, you say the caller will say ago, and then the response is amen. So let's try it. Ago. Very good. And now I would like to introduce Abena Beloved Green with Power to Move.
Good evening, everyone. It is certainly an honor to be here on this special occasion, the launch of this lecture series in honor of Mary Ann Shadd Cary. When I met Nanaba just a few weeks ago, it turned out that she told me about this series, and I was like, oh, I actually learned about her over 20 years ago in university in my creative writing class. I had been asked to do some kind of assignment, and so I looked her up and found out who she was and was amazed and impressed and inspired because that assignment ended up being something about Mary Ann Shadd being my mentor, or the person's mentor, I'm assuming it was me in it. So she was like, look for the piece, find it. I was like, there's no way I'm gonna find it. Long story short, I found it. Now, that's not what you're going to hear this evening. But in looking for that piece, I actually found a poem. Her name came up in another poem, and I was like, oh, what's this poem? And so I guess she lives on in my writing and keeps coming up, and so here we are again with a piece with a couple of people in it. Okay, this is Power to Move. Dear Miss Viola, I bet you didn't foresee how the story would go when your car broke down that November day on your way to a meeting in Sydney. What were your plans for your school of beauty before this obliged break? What film was showing that evening at the Roseland? A comedy? A romance? Did you get the chance to see the opening credits before the usher told you to move to the balcony? Before the manager insisted the same, then called the police? Even after you offered to pay the main floor rate, the ticket you had asked for in the first place? Did you see one scene before they dragged you out the theater doors, injuring your hip and knee? No lawyer, only the veins of a light bulb buzzing in the cell where you sat all night long. Boss beautician turned activist, how did it feel to be the face of a movement when all you wanted to do was watch a movie? How did it feel that moment you chose to say, no, I will not sit in the balcony? Dear Miss Mary Ann Shadd, when did you understand the power of words to move the heart of a man? To convince families to flee deranged systems of control, obsession with supremacy, ultimately insecure, compassionate persuasion from the pages of your paper lifted the hearts and hopes of your neighbors to earn fair wages for their intelligence, for their labor, to build their own tables, to fellowship as family, to warm their feet by the fire after dinner, and to have their children read all by themselves from the words of the good book, or maybe the Freeman. Their voice is clear as stars against night. What was it like to hide in order to be seen? To use the names of two male colleagues on your masthead so readers would consider your arguments for abolition. Not a guarantee if they knew the words were from a woman. You've shown a leader must be clever, knowing when to reveal her name and when to lay low, something you learned in childhood, I suppose. when your home was a hiding place for freedom seekers? How did they keep the roof from creaking? The baby from crying, the older children from breathing too heavy. Your family challenged the system, risking their lives for the sake of justice. Are there any left like them? And you, Miss Mary Ann, made good on your word. A school for freedom seekers. Once in Windsor, the kids learned to spell ABOLITION and FREEDOM. Maybe some became lawyers, educators, or put critical messages in ink just like you. Maybe they used the gift of freedom to finally be regular citizens. Maybe they learned how to turn $1 into 30. Maybe they learned from their journey that aspiring leader or not, one must be clever. One must take risks. So when the moment comes, the convictions make them ready to take a small action that will poke the heart of a man and to share a few words potent enough to make a person move. Thank you so much.
Abena, thank you. How are you? That was good, right? Good evening, and welcome to the first annual Mary Ann Shadd Cary Lecture at Carleton University. My name is, yes! We honor our firsts, and the seconds and the thirds. My name is Danaba Duncan. I'm an associate professor in the Carty Chair in Journalism, Diversity, and Inclusion Studies. I'm going to acknowledge the land that we're on. I was born in Accra, Ghana. I was born of two tribes, the Fanti people of my father, the people who lived by the water, and the Akwapim people on my mother's side, those who live in the mountains. My parents brought me to Turtle Island when I was very young, and I know what it's like to feel connected to a land and its peoples. I stand on the traditional, unceded territories of the Algonquin Nation, who've stewarded the Kitchissippi watershed since time immemorial. I have a lot to learn about the Algonquin Nation, and I think it's my responsibility to take steps to do so. I also recognize that there are many communities of African descent who arrived on these lands through forced migrations and under the same colonial structures that have oppressed indigenous peoples for centuries. When we name shared threads of colonial violence, we commit to uplifting indigenous sovereignty and advancing the liberation of people of African descent. Our struggles intersect in powerful ways, so may we continue to build understanding through shared knowledge, healing, and meaningful alliances. On this land of migration and refuge, we're honoring a woman who built community across borders and spoke truth to power. Mary Ann Shadd Cary. So about 5 years ago, I was on one of the luckiest Zoom calls. I was with my fellow co-founders of Media Girlfriends, a podcast production company we used to run. I was with Garvia Bailey and Hannah Sung. It was our first meeting with Historica Canada. This is the group that make the Heritage Minutes and the Canadian Encyclopedia. They hired us to make a bilingual Black history podcast and video series. And we were brainstorming who to feature. And Garvia says, we have to do Mary Ann Shadd Cary. And so we all said, yes, absolutely. Educator, abolitionist, lawyer, and opinion writer, a journalist, the first Black woman to publish and edit a newspaper in Canada, the first woman to publish a newspaper in North America. The Provincial Freeman was first and foremost an anti-slavery newspaper. It advocated for Black equality, equity, and rights. She was formidable. She withstood racism. She withstood misogyny. So yeah, absolutely we're gonna do an episode on her. And then the researcher on the Historica Canada team says, I'm related to her. And I was like, what? Wait, what do you mean? And she says, oh yeah, that's my great, 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 great auntie. The person talking was Marishana Mabusela, who ended up on the podcast with her mother, Adrienne Shadd, who will be delivering the opening remarks today. Yeah, you can clap. So that lucky Zoom call started a relationship with the Shadd family, including an invite from Shannon Prince, who was here. She's the former curator of the Buxton National Historic Site, where Shadd Cary's printing press lives, and great, great, great niece of Mary Ann Shadd Cary. And she invited me to stay at her place when Canada Post launched a commemorative stamp in Mary Ann Shadd Cary's name. The Shadds have also given permission to me to use their relative's name for my research center, the Mary Ann Shadd Cary Center for Journalism and Belonging. And that center is dedicated to research, education, and community engagement to promote a more inclusive and diverse news media environment in Canada. So we're currently working on the Black Journalists and Media Workers Survey. It's a national survey. And we're also working on reporting in Black communities. This is a research project to create an evidence-based, Black community-informed resource for journalists, students, educators to report on Black communities in Canada with accuracy, dignity, and equity. So I'm really grateful to be doing this work under the banner of Mary Ann Shadd Cary's legacy. Camille Dundas is continuing that legacy. She is the co-founder and editor-in-chief of BuyBlacks.com, an award-winning Black online magazine, and she will deliver tonight's lecture. Camille is a journalist and entrepreneur, and she got her start as a journalism student on this very campus. But things are different now, due in part to the students and graduates who issued a call to action to faculty, highlighting its mistreatment of racialized students and demanding changes, including a call for racialized faculty, especially Black and Indigenous ones. And there's still a lot of work to do, but my presence here is part of that change, including the launch of the Shadd Cary Center, my research, my courses. And it also includes my colleague, Professor Adrienne Harewood. He launched the graduate seminar, Journalism, Race, and Diversity, the school's first course focused on race. He also created the History of Black Journalism, the first course of its kind. And I'll note here that it's in Adrienne's blood. His dad is right there. John Harewood he wrote a column for Contrast, and his mother was a poet in residence for Contrast. Contrast was the largest circulation English language Black newspaper in Canada in the 70s and 80s. Then we have my colleague, Professor Duncan McHugh. He's Anishinaabe and a member of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. He also joined us a few years ago, making great strides. Duncan has launched the Certificate in Journalism in Indigenous Communities, a 10-month program that allows Indigenous students to study journalism in their home communities. This is all great stuff. And what should not be overlooked is that our peers support us in this work. It is really hard to drive change when the people around you don't care, or you think that the people around you don't care. That's not my experience here at Carleton. We have the support at the level of the Faculty of Public and Global Affairs and through the leadership of Alan Thompson, the head of the journalism program. Here's how his commitment shows up. It's in the minutia, like making sure a projector of Mary Ann's face is bright enough and placed in the right spot. And I'm just sorry that we didn't get one with enough lumens. We'll get it right next time. Before him, the school's former head, Susan Harada, championed the implementation of mandatory courses on Indigenous history, among other accomplishments. And we're not done, right? We're not done. It's not a project that gets done, what, we're gonna fix racism, no. But all of it matters. It matters especially as we experience a cultural move away from anti-racism and equity for all genders. It is paramount and urgent that we double down and intensify our focus on people from historically underrepresented and misrepresented communities. So Camille, we were intentional in choosing you to join us at this time of change. What you do represents an extension and an echo of Mary Ann Shadd Cary's work. It's been my mission to make sure that our industry recognizes and honors Mary Ann Shadd Cary's legacy in journalism. And with you, 202 years since she was born, her birthday's on Thursday, we're doing just that. And all of this is happening partly because of the woman who came up with the idea of creating a lecture in Mary Ann Shadd Cary's name. It wasn't me. This woman has been my sister in this project and in my career here since I joined the faculty in 2021. When we met, I quickly learned how much she supports women and non-binary folks in our industry. She's got a quiet excellence and a humility that makes me want to shout her accomplishments whenever I can. So I'm really honored to introduce you now. To speak to the significance of this lecture for the School of Journalism and Communication, please welcome my colleague and associate professor, Dr. Trish Audette Longo.
Thank you. Tonight's Mary Ann Shadd Cary lecture is the first in Carleton journalism's 80-year history to be named for a woman. I proposed this lecture last year after organizing a special public lecture given by Passant Matter entitled Objectivity, Press Freedom, and the Palestine Exception. Some of you were here for that lecture on this floor last fall. Passant opened her reporter's notebook, laid out the unwritten rules at play in Canada's newsrooms, and held them up for closer public scrutiny and debate. Following her lecture, she was joined on stage by 3 journalism students who led the night's questions and asked about what it takes to make change and what it takes to continue doing the work. I am so thankful to work with Inaba Duncan to realize the Mary Ann Shadd Cary lecture, to set out the goals of centering voices of change in Canadian journalism and centering principles of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Tonight, 3 journalism students, Simone R. Brown, Sarah J. Harp, and Georgia Lumen, will join Camille on stage. Including students in this lecture by hiring and training them to moderate a public discussion sets the Mary Ann Shadd Cary lecture apart by design. We want to make sure that students have opportunities to meet with, learn from, and be inspired by each year's lecturer, on stage and in a classroom workshop earlier in the day. Unlike our other marquee lectures, the Mary Ann Shadd Cary lecture does not have endowed or year-to-year funding. It is only possible to share this space, invite speakers to this stage, live stream, hire and train students to moderate this public lecture, and offer graduate students a separate practical workshop because individual alumni, individual community members, and the Canada Race Relations Foundation believed in the importance of having a lecture named for Mary Ann Shadd Cary and donated to our Future Funder campaign. This lecture is meant to feature women and non-binary journalists from misrepresented and underrepresented communities. It is meant to amplify their insights on making change in how we understand and how we do journalism. It is meant to be a place where we imagine alternative journalism futures together. Before you leave tonight, if you believe in this project, please donate. And there's a tip-tap machine at the back there. If everyone in this room and everyone who has registered to stream this lecture from home donates just $10, we will be about $2,000 closer to our goal of making this a sustainable annual lecture in Carleton University's journalism program. There will also be opportunities tonight for you to ask questions. There is a QR code for a Slido that you can post questions to through the night. And Ninaba and I will be monitoring these, and then we will ask questions on your behalf after the student-moderated discussion. So thank you.
And now I'm happy to introduce Adrienne Shadd. Adrienne is a consultant, curator, and author who has conducted research for plaques, films, and exhibits. Most recently, she was part of the Dalhousie University team that developed a comprehensive research and education project called A Black People's History of Canada. She is the author, co-author, and editor of many books and articles, including The Journey from Tollgate to Parkway, African Canadians in Hamilton. The Underground Railroad, Next Stop Toronto, with Afua Cooper and Carolyn Smarts Frost, was shortlisted for the Toronto Book Awards in 2022. Adrienne's been recognized with the William P. Hubbard Award for Race Relations and the J.C. Holland Award for Arts Achievement for her research and writing. She's currently working on a book on a Toronto settler and freedom seeker, Deborah Brown. Mary Ann Shadd Cary is Adrienne's great. Is it, how many greats is that? Is it great? There's 3. great, great, great auntie. Everyone, please welcome Adrienne Shadd.
Thank you so much, Nanaba. How is everybody doing this evening? Excellent, excellent. So it goes without saying that I'm incredibly honored to speak to you today at the inaugural speaker series of the Mary Ann Shadd Cary Center for Journalism and Belonging. And that name has a great ring in my ears. I would like to congratulate Nanaba Duncan for creating, for spearheading, and bringing this important center to fruition. It's a fantastic achievement, and I think everybody should give her another round of applause. I would like to thank Nanaba and the Carleton School of Journalism and Communication for this special honor for our ancestor and great-great-great-aunt. So Mary Ann Shadd was the first of 13 children of Abraham and Harriet Parnell Shadd. Both my cousin Shannon Prince and I are descended from Garrison Shadd, who was one of Mary Ann Shadd's younger brothers. And all of the Shadd descendants that we know of, I think I'm right on this, Shannon, are the offspring of either Garrison Shadd, who was a farmer, Elizabeth Shadd Shreve, who was a home missionary and exhorter, and Amelia Shadd Williamson. And she, if you know anything about the newspaper, you know that Amelia was the sister who helped out on the Freeman the most when Mary Ann Shadd was out of town canvassing for the paper or giving speeches and attending conventions and so on. So now that you know how Shannon and I are related to Mary Ann Shadd, I would love to be able to recount these fascinating tales of lore that we heard growing up from our parents and grandparents about our incredible ancestor and her family. Unfortunately, we never heard anything about Mary Ann Shadd until the first articles were published in American journals in the early 70s. And the first biography of her came out in 1977. So my understanding of Mary Ann Shadd Cary, just like yours, comes from reading the historical record, from reading the Provincial Freeman newspaper and other articles she wrote in other papers, from her private letters that have survived, and so on. So I'm just going to talk very briefly about her significance as a journalist and newspaper founder and editor from my point of view as a historian. Her writings, and in particular the Provincial Freeman, documented in real time the creation of Black communities across the province, and in particular provided evidence of the extent of organizing that was taking place in Canada West, i.e. Ontario, around the settlement and empowerment of people of African descent. The newspaper demonstrated that Canada West was the critical location of abolitionist activities, and it did this in part from Mary Ann Shadd's first-hand account because she was involved in so much of what was going on. Furthermore, we know where Black communities in the province existed, what employment freedom seekers were able to obtain, what barriers they faced in getting ahead, and what rights they enjoyed under the British legal system. But she also made it a point of reporting when those rights were abrogated. We also learned about the organizations these freedom seekers formed, who the leaders of those organizations were, and the critical issues being discussed and debated in the Black community at the time. The newspaper also documented the vast number of connections that existed between Canadian and American anti-slavery networks. But what has stood out for me, particularly as I read the Provincial Freeman, is how she insisted that her people be represented in the paper with intelligence, humanity, and with incredible fortitude and agency. In particular, Shadd made a point of the way that Black women were represented. The Freeman was an important forum for Black women, and a showcase for their talent and accomplishments. For example, the paper sang the praises of such outstanding African American women as concert singer Eliza T. Greenfield, otherwise known as the Black Swan, or writer, poet, and orator Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. And it reported on lesser-known achievements or women's and women's organizations who were given public recognition for their work and achievements. For example, Miss Gilcrease was recognized when she gave her first address on emigration before the Dumas Literary Association in Chatham. Her speech was reprinted in its entirety. The Freeman exposed discrimination faced by African people and encouraged them to fight back by a variety of means. One issue published the police report in which Mrs. Sarah Armstrong, described as a respectable colored lady and teacher in the school, gave a sworn statement charging dentist J.F. Grady with assault. It was actually attempted rape. When the accused failed to appear in court, he was sentenced to a fine or 30 days in jail. And African Canadian women derived tremendous inspiration from the pages of the Freeman, as noted by the appearance of several letters to the editor from Black women readers who themselves were sometimes uncomfortable writing to the editor of a newspaper. For these and many other reasons that I won't go into here, I've come to truly appreciate Mary Ann Shadd Cary's contributions as a newspaper publisher, editor, and journalist. The Provincial Freeman is a treasure trove of information about Black communities, about the organizations and events taking place, who the movers and shakers of those communities were, of the critical issues being discussed in the Black communities in Canada, not to mention the events and politics in the United States impacting those communities. As a descendant, but also as a historian, I am incredibly grateful that Mary Ann spearheaded and took on this newspaper project. I feel that as a researcher and chronicler of Black Canadian history myself, I'm trying to do the exact same thing that she was trying to do 170 years ago, which is confront the stereotypes of African people by depicting them as human beings who have not allowed history to happen to them, but who are making history happen through their own courage and resilience. She showcased people with talent and intelligence, people who were making a difference in their communities, men and women who, by the very act of liberating themselves from slavery, were forging their own lives in freedom. For these reasons, not to mention all of the other accomplishments she achieved in her lifetime, I couldn't be more proud that Mary Ann Shadd Cary's name was designated for this important and groundbreaking center of journalism. Thank you very much.
Wow. Adrienne Shadd, thank you for your remarks. It's really important that we learn about Mary Ann Shadd Cary. It's very special to hear it from family. So we wanted to highlight the entrepreneurial legacy of Mary Ann Shadd Cary tonight, and that's why we partnered with the Black Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub, or BEC, at Carleton's Sprott School of Business. BEC is a national data and knowledge platform supporting Black entrepreneurship across Canada, and we worked with them to spotlight Black women-owned businesses based in Ottawa, who you may have visited during the reception. If you haven't, don't worry, because after the lecture and discussion, we will serve dessert. So there will be time to shop and learn even more about BEC. And now, I would like to introduce the inaugural Mary Ann Shadd Cary lecturer, Camille Dundas. Camille Dundas is the co-founder and editor-in-chief of the award-winning online magazine ByBlacks.com. Her professional background is in television news. She graduated from the program, the journalism program here. She spent a decade as a producer in some of Canada's largest newsrooms, including CTV and CBC. Camille has led her By Blacks team to win 4 National Ethnic Media Awards and has been acknowledged by former Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, for her advocacy work. Camille was also named among the 100 top Black Canadian accomplished women in 2022 Please join me in welcoming her to the stage, Camille Dundas.
Thank you. Thank you, Nanaba, Trish Audette Longo, Alan Thompson, and the entire journalism school. I also want to thank my family for being here tonight. My husband, Roger, our legendary children, Marley Rose, Chase, my mom, my uncle Stedman, my cousin Chad, and his wife, Anita. And to all my siblings, my nieces, my nephews, and cousins tuning in on the live stream. We roll deep. This, of course, is an immense honor for me, but it is not mine alone. There are so many women who I share this honor with, women of persistence and defiance. From my grandmother, Mabel Moyer James, who was Dominica's first woman minister of government, to my big sister, Shan, who showed me how to argue a point anywhere, anytime, any place, with anyone. She's a very successful lawyer, so that worked out for her. And of course, my mom, who walked me into a local newspaper office when I was 14 years old, when we were living in St. Lucia, and told the owner he should give me a summer job. So yes, my first summer job was actually as a journalist, a columnist, in fact. I think it was called Teen Talk. My mom, she has a way of communicating without speaking. And I remember looking at her like, what are you doing? I'm just a kid. I can't work here. And she looked back at me like, yes, you can, and you will. So I did. Mom, thank you for showing me how to persist and defy, even when the voice you have to defy is the one inside your own head. I share this honor with you tonight, Mom, and all the other moms who've pushed their children to greatness. Would you stand for 1 second? And would you all help me in honoring my mom? So while we were still growing up in Toronto, my favorite part of school was the library. And one day we were asked to do a book report on a Canadian who inspires us. I remember walking along the bookshelves, running my index finger along the spines of the books while flapping them down to see the covers. And I stopped when I saw a book with a picture of a Black woman. Her name, Mary Ann Shadd Cary. Now, at 8 years old, when I handed in my book report on Mary Ann Shadd Cary, I, of course, had no idea that my career would be built on the path that she blazed. In 2007, when I was the only Black student in the graduating class of Carleton's journalism school, I, of course, could not even imagine that my name would ever be mentioned in the same sentence as Mary Ann Shadd Cary, let alone be standing here giving a lecture. During my time at Carleton School of Journalism, we learned extensively about the principles of objectivity. We were taught that we should never become the story ourselves, and that journalism should remain free of advocacy. While we learned how to find sources, we weren't taught how to care for them, or to care about what happens to those sources once a story is published. Like a mother who has just lost her son to gun violence, we stick a microphone in her face and offer condolences on our way out. We convince her that she should talk about who her son was rather than have people speculate. But what is the cost? And her image plastered all over the screen, sobbing for her dead child, well, that's simply collateral damage. We're not supposed to care about that. You get in, tell the story, get out, rinse, repeat. And I did just that for a very long time, almost 10 years to be exact, at the CBC, at CTV News, and CP24, where one night I was working a late shift, had to be around 10 o'clock, and the phone rang. I picked it up, and the voice on the other end asked me a question. Are you going to do a follow-up story about my brother? I was confused at first, and I asked what he was talking about. He said, you did a story about my brother. He was accused of something, and now he's been released. He's innocent. But you played that story over and over again and showed his face over and over again for days. So I'm asking you, are you going to do a follow-up story? I really didn't know what to say because I knew the answer was no. Of course we weren't going to do a follow-up story. That's not how the news works with these types of stories. With crime stories, police feed us press releases, mugshots, and we broadcast them, sometimes verbatim. We don't really question the version of events from police because they are the ultimate source. That's what we learned in journalism school. And it doesn't matter to us if you're guilty or not. It just matters that the police said they believe you did this crime. And so we broadcast your photo, your name, and all of the supposed facts over and over. And when it turns out you didn't do the thing police said you did, well, we don't really care. We just move on to the next mugshot. And so when we started ByBlacks.com, I tried to bring the best of what I learned in legacy media and leave the worst on the table that I walked away from. It wasn't easy, but it worked. We've been in business for 12 years. We are the only Black-focused national online magazine in Canada. We've won several national ethnic press awards, received recognition from the Prime Minister's office, and producers from legacy media regularly poach stories from our magazine, which I love. We remained committed to not just writing stories about people, but to write stories for people and with people. But to do that, I would have to bend and break some rules. First, I had to unlearn some of those rules that I learned at this very institution. Here's an example. Take a look at this post from a fellow journalist. He says, "No journalist worth their weight will let you read a story before publication. Your comments are on the record unless off the record is agreed to beforehand, and I'm probably recording our conversation, and I don't need your consent to do so." Now, let me be clear. I think these absolutely can be applied when doing investigative journalism, accountability journalism with politicians and people in power. Journalistic rigor and accountability must remain. But there must also be room to mitigate harm to the people we are writing about, especially when we are writing about deeply nuanced and complex social issues that affect everyday people living under extreme circumstances. These rules cannot always apply. And I read this short list of rules and I think, is there any surprise that public trust in the institution of journalism has been plummeting for years? It's not all Mark Zuckerberg's fault. It's not all Trump's fault. It's our fault. Because we've convinced ourselves that as journalists, we have ownership over someone's story once it leaves their lips and lands on our laptops. It's a very entitled and arrogant way of looking at life, that once you share something with me, I have a right to own it and do what I like with it. But our approach at ByBlacks.com involves a collective responsibility for our stories. This year, our most thought-provoking and impactful project was a three-part series we published called When Black Boys Go Missing. It's about teenage Black boys in Toronto and its suburbs who are getting groomed into drug crime. The series went beyond the stereotypes to understand how kids from what we thought to be safe neighborhoods and good families are becoming drug runners in remote Ontario towns, and why so many parts of the system assume inherent criminality, as opposed to seeing how the patterns of grooming are very similar to how girls get lured into sex trafficking. So what did we do differently? Well, for one, we granted ourselves the luxury of time. We took 3 months to research and write this series. We would not impose arbitrary deadlines, and you can ask my husband, who every couple of weeks poked his head in and asking, "Is it ready yet?" This gave us room to ensure that not only the story was ready, but the people in it were ready. Once we found our sources, the parents of some of these boys, through working with local churches and combing through internet comments, I was very open with them about the risks and realities of sharing their stories and why I thought it was still worth it. This is the kind of prep work that I did not learn in journalism school. The logic being that if you tell a source, hey, things might be bad for you after this story is published, they probably won't want to participate. But I knew there was a better way. I knew I could tell an impactful story without having to frighten or harm someone in the process. But it meant I'd have to break one of journalism's cardinal rules. I let my source read the story before it was published. Here's the message I sent to the parents I interviewed. Thank you for sharing your story with me. I'd like you to read it. I know this may be hard for you to read because talking about an experience is one thing, but seeing it in print can be overwhelming. Please take your time with it and let me know how you're feeling. I know that your story will help so many other families who are suffering silently. Now, one of the reasons we're taught not to do this is because people often change their minds about participating in a story once they see how you've written it, and that's kind of what happened. One of the parents immediately wanted to back out. She explained how terrified she was of being identified, even though we had changed all of the names. She told me she was also worried that her son would see the story and get angry and leave, and she would lose him all over again. Now, that is not something that I could live with as a mom or as a journalist. But if I was writing this story for a legacy media outlet, I probably would have been chastised for this. But I made a choice that many of my colleagues in corporate media are not able to make. Instead of exerting power, I shared it. I asked this mother to highlight which parts of the story she was comfortable telling and which parts she felt were revealing too much. And together, we came up with something that wasn't the precise vision I initially had in mind, but still effectively supported the story. She went from wanting to completely pull out from the story to working with me to tell the story in a way that didn't give her more anxiety than she already had. And I have to tell you, this was not a difficult choice for me. I did not hesitate to collaborate with her, because what would I gain from publishing the intimate details of someone's life experience without their consent and participation in the telling of that story? What do I gain from keeping sources out of the storytelling process? Yes, there is a risk of entirely losing your story, but the risk of losing myself, my empathy, is far worse. And that is something I always struggled to explain to my bosses and colleagues while I still worked in legacy media. News media has historically been weaponized against Black communities to reduce us to mugshots and caricatures. And we have to do the work to dismantle those kinds of biases through each story we tell. But that nuance was lost on most of the newsrooms I worked in. I learned a lot of great things in the newsroom, invaluable skills. But what I noted is that it was much easier for me to take what I learned from legacy media and apply it to our journalism at By Blacks, but it was much harder for me to take my community knowledge from By Blacks and share it with legacy media. Why can it not go both ways? Why do Black journalists have to erase part of ourselves in order to make it in legacy media? Why is it that we are dismissed when we say, hey, when we're covering a sensitive story about the Black community, we may have to do things differently? Some of your rules may not apply here. There may be different risks that we have to take. My hope is that the Mary Ann Shadd Cary Center will be integral in asking these tough questions and allowing us room to debate the answers. Lastly, I want to acknowledge that I am standing here before you tonight carrying the wisdom of media founders that came way before me, like Al Hamilton of Contrast newspaper, Ewart Walters of Spectrum newspaper, Arnold August of Share newspaper, and many others. They were educating us on the harm of extractive journalism before it became a buzzword. So what I am saying here tonight is nothing new. It may be the first time you've heard it, but I assure you it's not the first time it's been said. But apparently, I am the first woman in 80 years to be able to say it here in a lecture on a stage like this. The gravity of that is not lost on me. And while I am being celebrated here tonight, I want us to really sit with that fact, because I am not sure that me being the first is necessarily a point of pride. The truth of what that point really means, the first woman in 80 years, is in the discomfort we all just felt in that silence. But discomfort is good. And I want you to think of all the ways you may have upheld the so-called rules of engagement in journalism or any other field, and unknowingly silenced others just to stay comfortable. I want you to think about how much comfort and silence has played a role in keeping a woman from this stage for 80 years. This is not the time for silence. We are in a time of resistance. In fact, we should be in a perpetual state of resistance, because the hand of oppression, of fascism, of media censorship never rests. It is always organizing, always fundraising, always playing a very, very long game. And so we must never rest in our naivete or in our hope that everything will balance out one day. We must resist. And if you cannot resist, at least don't get in the way of those who will. Thank you.
For your lecture, your wise words, and to everybody else, good evening. We are your honored co-moderators for tonight. My name is Simone Brown.
My name is Sarah Harb. And my name is Georgia Lumen.
Amazing. Hey. So I have the privilege of asking our first question to you. Oftentimes, as journalists, we feel this pressure or this need to create distance between communities, sources, or the stories that we're trying to tell in the name of our judgment or journalistic integrity. You kind of mentioned that in your lecture, but I'm curious if you could flesh out how you've reconciled being a reporter, but also not being afraid to be that kind of active participant.
Well, it's on now? Yes. It certainly starts with a mind shift, because from everything we've been taught, you can never be in the story, you can never be of the story. But for any journalist of any ethnic community or otherwise, it is very difficult for us. Like, I cannot separate my blackness from my womanness from my blackness, or both of those things from my work as a journalist. But we've been taught that that's a bad thing. But I'm bringing something unique to the approach when I include those things. So it starts with a mind shift of us not seeing that as something negative. Yes, there is a line. There is always a line, right? I'm not saying throw yourself into every story. But we cannot ignore what is at the forefront of our minds when we step into a community. There's a certain knowing that we come with. There's a certain innate knowledge that we come with. There's also access that we bring. I was talking earlier to your classmates about the Black Boys Missing story, and how much more difficult it would be for a non-Black journalist to take on that story when all of these conversations were happening in Black churches. You're not going to be able to walk into a Black church in a town hall of weeping parents, some of whom have lost their children, and go up to any of them and get them to tell you their story. They're looking at you with suspicion and fear. And so I want newsrooms and other media institutions to start seeing these things as strengths, not as something that the journalist has to either hide or be ashamed of or try to distance themselves from within.
Amazing. So mainstream media will often teach us that Black people are either extraordinary, either an exceptional athlete, or a Beyonce-level artist, or dangerous, and rarely just human. So how does By Blacks fill that gap?
That was the very gap that we set out to fill. When my husband Roger, By Blacks was his idea, and initially it was a Black business directory. And a friend of ours said, hey, tell stories about the people so that people will come back to the website. It was natural, me already being a journalist, to fall into that side of the business. But I had a front row seat while working in legacy media to how our community is covered. And it was in those extremes. And for Roger and I, that was not our lived experience. We had so many friends, family members, just ordinary Black folks doing extraordinary things with their lives who are not getting media coverage, and it did not add up for us. So for us, there was that ignored, uncovered middle that we focused on. And clearly, it's successful, and these people in that middle are deserving of media coverage. So that's, if you go on the website, you will see all kinds of different intersections of Black life. And we don't see that represented in legacy media and corporately owned media. So that's how we filled that gap, just by existing, really. It wasn't that hard, I gotta say. It wasn't revolutionary. We just looked at our 5 closest friends, our next 10 closest friends, and 20 closest colleagues, and we're like, oh, you're amazing, you're awesome, that's a great story. It's never difficult for us to find great stories that just happen to be Black people.
And what do you think that kind of storytelling does for young people?
I hope that it not only inspires them, but it allows them. A mirror is a very important thing. Whenever you're trying to teach a child confidence, you often have them to look in the mirror and say affirmations, right? And to have a societal mirror for yourself is a powerful thing. And before by Blacks, yes, of course, as I mentioned, we had so many incredible Black-owned newspapers. But when it came to online, Black folks in Canada mainly turned to the US to see themselves reflected. And while we love our brothers and sisters across the border, we have a unique life experience. And so that's why we also committed to having Black Canadian content only on the website, which has been a challenge because the more popular the website got, we get inundated sometimes with pitches from America, from Black America about amazing stories there. But for us, it's like, you all have a lot of resources, a lot of places to put your stories, you know? So that's awesome that you want your story to be on by Blacks, but we are reserving this space for Black Canadians. That's not to say we will never expand and grow and include other areas, but as of right now, we want to focus on uplifting Black in Canada.
Amazing, thank you.
The way you describe journalism seems to be a collaborative effort, especially when you were doing the When Black Boys Go Missing series, versus legacy media that seems to be very transactional sometimes. So how do you think journalism can be reframed as a collaborative effort?
It's a big question, because there are so many ways to go about that. But one that I think is maybe less talked about is I think that there are so many opportunities for legacy media to actually collaborate with community media. And I don't think it's done well. When legacy media tries to collaborate with community media, they still lean on the extractive model, which is, oh, can you put us in touch with so-and-so? Can you go to that church thing and get those people to talk to us? Or it's all very like, you go and do this, and then bring it back to us, and then we'll do the rest of the work, and then you're no longer involved. As opposed to, if you know that you don't have the resources or access to tell a story, why not, but you do have a lot of resources, way more than we do, why not approach that ethnic media organization or community media organization and say, hey, we'd love to do a story on this. Would you like to collaborate with us? And you can get credit. You can actually get a byline, or we'll pay you X amount to do this work. Why not actually work with us instead of poaching our stories and then reframing them in a way that sometimes is a little offensive. Sometimes they get it right, but because it's difficult to grasp all of the nuances without the experience, it often falls flat. So I think that I mean, we have had a couple of partnerships with big media that haven't really gone that well because of that, because it's difficult to change the mindset from this extractive model.
Do you have any tips for young journalists like us, those who are in school, that can kind of, little ways that we can kind of be more collaborative and communicative with our sources?
Lots of tips, yes. When it comes to your sources, as I said earlier, give yourself time. And this is when we're covering sensitive stories specifically, right? Not just your everyday run-of-the-mill story. Try as much as you can to put yourself in their shoes. I know that is difficult, but I had to do that many times with that series and think of myself, if this was my child, how would I be feeling in this moment? How would I even bring myself to speak to somebody and tell them this story about what has happened to me? Why would I do that? What's in it for them? If a parent is willing to talk to me about that story, it means they care more about how this is impacting their community and not just themselves, because they're willing to share, because they don't want to see somebody else go through this. So I have to value that. I have to validate that. So it's very important to do your research in terms of terminology, in terms of nuances from that specific culture that you're speaking to. Come to the table with some knowledge, not expecting to be taught. You will learn, but acknowledge where your knowledge gaps are.
Yeah, that's some real advice. Thank you for that. Shifting slightly, I'm curious to ask you about your relationship with carrying the weight of legacy. We're sitting on a stage where you've acknowledged you're experiencing a lot of firsts, and that can be a lot to carry or deal with or face. So how do you hold space, if you hold space at all, with reconciling that legacy?
No. That is the short answer. I hold zero space for thinking about my legacy. The reason for that is your legacy is like your personal brand. It's the things that people say about you when you're not in the room. And I can do nothing about that. And each of us is a villain and a hero in somebody's story. That's facts.
Yeah.
Everyone will experience me and by Blacks, the work that we do, differently. And so I cannot control what my legacy will be. I can control what I'm doing today and tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that. And so I make space for being present about the impact of what I am doing. I have no idea what my legacy will be. And I'll be dead, so what does it matter? But on the flip side though, I mentioned where I came from because that is important to me, right? It's important for me to see from whence I came. It's important for me to realize that Mary Ann Shadd Cary could not put her name on her publication.
Yeah.
I own my name. We own by Blacks. No one can, no matter what, can take that away from us. And I can go anywhere in this world and say my name and say by Blacks. I don't have to hide that. And so any moment that I feel discouraged or I feel like things are never going to change, all I have to do is look back and say, oh, look how much they've changed.
So now we've seen ourselves in a very pivotal moment in society. And social media is now the public square for journalism, where we see influencers with massive platforms and often unconstrained by journalistic standards rewrite some stories. So how can we as journalists be responsible online? Should we look into empowering our community, or should we challenge those who are challenging our stories?
I love what social media has done for storytelling. It has democratized storytelling. At the same time, those of us who have been formally trained in journalism, it's irksome. Because we see facts go by the wayside, we see any type of rigor be dismissed, and yes, any journalist cannot sleep well at night when you know there is misinformation floating out there. You just can't. You want to correct every single thing, right? So there's all different sides to this. There's two sides of a coin. But you're asking if we should challenge those who are challenging us. 100%. I never back down from one. So if and I'm not going to even say if, people are challenging the validity of journalism based on the fact that everyone believes they can be a journalist. So do I push back against that? Absolutely, and you should. And we all need to defend the people who have stepped up to be the arbiters of truth. But we have to be responsible in the sense that we have to admit where our biases are. We have to admit that when it comes to being arbiters of truth, we are each filtering those things through our own personal criterion. We have to be honest about that. And I think that if we had been, maybe we would have had a bit more trust in the public by now. Of course, there are many other issues impacting that, but we have to be forthcoming about the fact that objectivity doesn't actually exist. Because the four of us are sitting here on this stage, we're all in the same room, and each of us is internally having a very different experience, I promise you. Right? So from where you're sitting, from where I'm sitting, we're all having a different experience. So does that mean you're not objective? Does that mean when I go and tell someone about this event and I don't include what you experienced, does that mean that I'm not objective? It's all completely personal. So just being honest about that, I think, would be actually a monumental shift for journalism if we were to be honest about that.
Okay, so clearly the journalism world has changed a lot since you were in journalism school, and a lot of who you've become as a journalist, I believe, you've gained throughout your career and kind of made your own experiences. So if you were to teach yourself, if you were your own professor and go back to when you came to Carleton journalism, what would you teach yourself?
You know what, actually? I think that one thing that young journalists, aspiring journalists, need to focus on it actually has nothing to do with journalism. But I think it's actually very important when you get onto this path. And it is about self-knowing and avoiding self-abandonment. If you never heard that phrase, I want you to research that phrase when you leave here tonight. Because so many of us, and we're here talking about women, so many women in particular self-abandon in our careers, in our friendships, relationships, etc. And if you come into a profession having already self-abandoned, there's no way that you can bring your worth, that you can bring that unique value to your work. Because if you have already abandoned yourself in order to fit into what you think or what you've been told is what is going to give you success, you've already lost. And I can tell you that from a personal point of view, because I spent the first year of my career completely abandoning myself, thinking, I looked around and I saw the model of what is success, and I tried to shed my blackness, my Caribbeanness, my everything as much as possible to divorce myself from that so that I could appear as close to the whiteness as possible, if we're being real about it. And what did I trade for that? A lot. And what did my employer lose from me doing that? They lost a lot too. That was a losing game. I lose myself, and they lose the privilege of having me show up in all of me.
I love that point. I love the fact that you shifted it, and it's like you lose, but they also lose. And I also love when you were talking about how when you walk into a room, they know your name, you own your platform. Something, I don't know, shivers about that. Because I think ownership is a really good point. You bring up the fact that Mary Ann Shadd Cary didn't write under her name when she first started out. Can you speak to the value of owning your voice, not just in this career, but just in life in general?
Earlier, I was speaking with someone in one of the rooms I was in, and they asked me a similar question, what advice would I give to young journalists, to young writers? And I said, if you want to be a writer, then write. Remember that you have been a writer since the day you learned to spell and write your name, because your name is your first story. So you want to be a writer? Write. When somebody comes to me and says, oh, I want to be a filmmaker, I want to be a documentary, I want to do documentaries, I said, okay, show me what you've done. Where's your writing? Where are your films? Pick it up and start, right? And so that's the advice. Know that you are already there, because it is just a journey. You're in school, but you're already a journalist. You've published a story, you've written a story, you are a journalist. So show up as that, and it'll show up for you.
Okay. Awesome. Well, that concludes our questions. So thank you very much. We very much appreciate this opportunity, and I can speak for all of us. We're very excited, very happy to be here. I'll pass it back over to Trish and Anaba. Yeah, thank you.
Weren't they good? Yeah.
You guys killed that. You guys are
You're a
so
good
good.
All right. I think you have some, yeah, we'll do it here. So we've had, this is the Q&A part of the night, and you see the QR code there. So if you have a question, you can put it in. We have, shall we ask both of them? Okay. This question is, in fighting back by any means necessary, what tools are at our disposal at institutions?
Sometimes it seems that there aren't any. But no matter where you go, whether it's in an institution or outside of an institution, all you actually ever have is your voice and your resolve, your persistence, your willingness to never give up and not stop speaking about something. When I was working in the newsroom in Toronto, I worked with a producer who, when I pitched a story, he asked me what the date was. The date was February 4th. And he said, are we done with Black History Month?
What'd you say? I want to know what you said.
I said, no, actually we're not, sir. And so you have to be willing to have those very uncomfortable moments where you now have to decide, do I shrink back? Or do I say, actually, this story doesn't have anything to do with history? And you know what? All your other Black History Month coverage didn't have anything to do with Black history either. You just took random Black business people and decided that was history. Now, you may not say that in your first year of journalism. You may not want to go that route.
Yeah.
So I have to admit that, there's a certain seniority that I got to a point that I felt comfortable saying these things, right? But it is literally all you have, your voice and your resolve.
Okay, so this is also from the audience. How do you manage telling stories in the middle on Black history? How do we tell our Black history responsibly when some of those stories involve, for example, criminals?
I don't know what that question is getting at, to be honest with you.
I think
So we were actually talking about that. So if you're in the room and you want to clarify, you can tell us. But what I think it means is that you were talking about this middle, the nuance, the like in between the exceptional and the worst or dangerous. And I think the question is about how do we.
Nanaba?
Oh, yes, thank you. Please.
Yes, that's exactly it. But like my research is Black families that was in sex work in the 19th century and was with family murdered someone. And like that's an exceptional. That's like an interesting story, but like that's the current Black story. Like
it's either criminal or like somebody who's done something exceptional. But that's a very important story because it teaches us a lot on like survival and like Black womanhood and like all kinds of things. So like, where do you put that story in a responsible way? Like when you're talking about, well, of course it's a Black story, so it's a criminal story. And then of course it's a woman, so like Black women are, the stereotype, the Jezebel.
Well, here's the thing. I'm not advocating against us glossing or glistening over any of our history. But I think what's more, the more important part of your question can really be applied to today, like how we cover our Black community today. Because what I am trying to strike is balance. And I'm not saying that we need to, shy away from bad things that are happening in our community. In fact, at By Blacks, we have pushed the envelope quite a bit and exposed things that have happened at institutions and organizations within our community, and we've gotten a lot of pushback for that. We've gotten people who would say to us, well, we shouldn't air our dirty laundry, and this will just make it so much harder for other people in the community. And we say no to that. Because and now this is an intra-community conversation we're gonna have here, okay? Yeah. For way, 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 way too long, the media in our community has not stepped up to hold our organizations accountable. And so now, when there's an organization like us who is willing to say, we're watching you and we're gonna report on this, it makes everyone uncomfortable because that hasn't been our modus operandi for the past however many years.
It's a bit like not talking about what's happening inside our house.
That is correct.
Like we're not supposed to be doing that.
That is correct. And you know where that comes from, right? Okay. So that is a cycle we have to break. I cannot be loyal to my community at the expense of our principles. And if we never hold each other accountable for the negativity that some people and organizations are bringing to our community, then we just keep repeating the cycle over and over again. So there has to be some balance there, is what I'm saying. And not shying away from reporting on it. Now, you asked about being responsible. Being responsible means you put all of these things into context, right? Into the context of systemic racism, of understanding why things are a certain way at a certain point in time. That's, to me, what responsibility means.
What could you tell Black writers who struggle to find jobs in journalism and have become discouraged to stay in this industry?
What could I tell you? It is discouraging, but here's the thing. If you are a writer, there really is nothing that can stop you from writing. I'll tell you that. Any writer knows that because it's within you and it's gotta get out. So if you have to work a 9-to-5, work a side hustle, do whatever it is that you have to do, but do not self-abandon. That's what I mean by that. You understand? Do not abandon that thing that makes you wake up in the morning, if it is your writing. Every single one of you, we need your voice. Every single one of you brings something unique to this conversation over every day that we have it. So don't self-abandon. That's my advice.
We have a question about money. How do you tell stories in our shifting and financially deprived media landscape?
I should have Roger up here. He's the money man of the business. But one thing I have learned from him is that he's always looking for new sources of money. So whether it's a grant, or whether it's, okay, now we're gonna do in-person events, or we're gonna do a national campaign, we're gonna do, we're always, whether it's online ads, social media, he's always shifting and pivoting to find new ways. You always have to be thinking about how else can we bring in revenue. Yes, it is challenging, but we shift with the times and we figure it out. Black folks always have.
I'm just going to say to the students, so while we have the answers to these and you've got some follow-up questions, please do ask. How can I overcome the fear of making mistakes when reporting on communities that are not my own?
That is a fantastic question. And you will make a mistake. I assure you. You will make mistakes. You will make a mistake. Because you can only get it right through trying. And as I said before, though, come to the table with some knowledge. So before you approach that story, do some of your own reading and research and talking to people unrelated to the story. And approach the story with humility. That means approaching the source or whoever is involved with the story, letting them know that I know I may get some things wrong here, so please correct me when I'm wrong. It's as simple as asking somebody to tell you how to pronounce their name. Starting with those very simple markers of respect. You may not get over the fear, but you just have to acknowledge that it's there and acknowledge where your gaps are. That is the first step to getting over that.
I do have a follow-up.
And humility.
Yeah, sorry. If you do, as a journalist, make a mistake, publish something that perpetuates harm, how do you reconcile that not only with yourself, but with the community? Yeah. What's the solution?
Honesty and humility, right? You should address it as soon as possible. You should retract, obviously, and correct it. And also show that you're committed to not having that happen again. That's called doing the work. And I also want to say here that when we see lots of public apologies, right? When things go wrong. And we often believe that people owe us forgiveness. That once we apologize, right? That, okay, everything's going to be fine now because, I apologized. But why should we trust that you actually are engaged with that if you are not demonstrating that you are doing the self-work to understand why you thought it was okay to say X, Y, and Z?
How do you see the evolution of Black voices in Canadian journalism, and what still needs to change?
Well, I would say that when I look at those who came before us, right? And even I would say still now, it's Black media is still, it's very niche in the sense that when you look at what we have today, you'll have a Black-focused newspaper or magazine that's focused on the Caribbean, one that's focused on Africa, then you have one specific to Ghana, specific to Nigeria, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I do see some evolving there, and maybe we were at the forefront of that in terms of being pan-Canadian, dare I say, or also featuring the intersections of our identity that have traditionally been taboo.
For example?
Right? For example, Black queer communities, Black disabled communities. And by Blacks, it's very apparent to us when we look at our coverage versus others, the absence of that coverage on other Black media platforms is very stark. I'll put it that way.
I think we'll end it there. It was good. It was good.
Okay, thank you all for being here tonight. We have so many people to thank for making this night possible, including Carleton University's School of Journalism and Communication and Journalism Program Head Alan Thompson, the Faculty of Public and Global Affairs, Jamie Sadgrove, every journalism student who worked hard behind the scenes tonight to make this night possible. And you've probably seen them kind of everywhere, especially there at the back. Nanaba Duncan.
Oh.
And the Mary Ann and the Mary Ann Shadd Cary Center for Journalism and Belonging. the Canada Race Relations Foundation, and every individual donor who made this night possible. Before you leave tonight, please donate to the annual Mary Ann Shadd Cary lecture. There is that tip-tap machine, which is right there in the back corner. It is red and white and standing on its own. Your donation will provide training for journalism students and make it possible to celebrate the outstanding achievements, ideas, and leadership of women and non-binary journalists from misrepresented and underrepresented communities every year.
And I want to thank you for being my partner in this project. I want to thank our colleagues, everyone who supported us in this, for this day, and definitely to the ones who support me in the background every day, my family, Ian and Ofe and Ebo. I love you all. But most of all, once again, to our first ever speaker for the Mary Ann Shadd Cary Lecture, Camille Dundas. Thank you. That concludes our night. I want you to take some time to get to know each other, to take a look at all the businesses that are here, and we really, really appreciate you coming, and we're going to be doing this again. Please give us money. Thank you so much. Good night. I don't see it, so I didn't want to talk. It's not there, is it?
I don't see it.
I don't see it.